حبك يا لبنان 2020.
وجوب تسهيل مهمة رئيس الحكومة.
إن هذه المعادلة المصر قد ماتت على يد حزب الله بالذات.
We are prepared to strike whenever we choose.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's headlines. Economic committees and the Syndicate Coordination Committee unite during a nationwide strike to demand the formation of a strong and capable cabinet. The Council of Maronite Bishops condemns the alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria and calls for a peaceful resolution. And leaders of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee say they have reached an agreement on a draft authorization for the use of military force in Syria. The head of the economic bodies, former Minister Adnan Kassad, has vowed that escalatory measures will be adopted if a government is not formed anytime soon. During a press conference held today, Kassad urged politicians to form a government, put aside their personal interests and resort to dialogue to pull Lebanon out of crisis. The failure to form a new government prompted the economic committees and the Syndicate Coordination Committee to unite in their demands for a strong and capable cabinet, which culminated with a nationwide strike calling on politicians to resolve the country's crisis. Kassad says the success of the general strike confirms the move of the committees meets to request of every Lebanese. Economy Minister Nicholas Nahas says the economic body's protest, regardless of the side organizing it, is righteous. Nahas says the demonstrators' cries should be heard in order to urge politicians to resort to dialogue and spare Lebanon from the impact of regional turmoil. Speaking to Al Shadid Radio, Nahas says this government tried to handle numerous decisions adopted by the parliament to push the economic wheel forward. He believes the reason behind the recession is the ongoing war in Syria and the lack of quorum among Lebanese parties. The Council of Maronite Bishops condemns the alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria and rejects the use of force. The Council says that the war should be resolved peacefully away from the use of arms. The statement comes after the bishop's monthly meeting with Patriarch Bashar al-Ra'i at his summer residence in Diman. The attendees lauded Lebanese expats who have visited the country over the summer despite the wars and turmoil in the region. They urged the West and international organizations to be wary of the consequences of potential attacks on the Syrian regime. The bishops also stressed the need for the swift formation of a cabinet. Prime Minister Najib Mikati, who attended part of the meeting, reiterates his call for the adoption of a policy of dissociation regarding the events raging in the Middle East. President Sleiman says he hopes the parliamentary blocs and political leaders will welcome the request of the economic committees and exert efforts to form a new government. The president also calls for the resumption of the national dialogue to continue discussions on a national defense strategy amid growing threats, mainly the danger posed by Israel. Subsequent to a meeting with Sleiman, the Economic Committee's delegation announced confidence in the president's role in preserving national unity and stability. Syrian ambassador to the UN, Bashar al-Jafari, calls U.S. President Barack Obama the bully of the world after a closed-door meeting between UN Disarmament Chief Angela Kane and the 37 UN member states. Jafari added that any U.S. attack will kill innocent civilians, as it happened in Iraq in 1991. The Syrian ambassador also questioned the political motives in the U.S. Congress pushing for an American strike, in his words.
Pointed the American administration to anticipate on the outcome and the final findings of the mission of investigation. How could the United States of America act unilaterally speaking from outside the context of the United Nations? Who asked Mr. Obama to be the bully of the world? Why not waiting until the investigative team headed by Dr. Selstrom has finalized and completed its mission of investigation? I'm defending the fate of my own people. We are not warmongers. We are not here to defy the American arsenal. The American missiles crews are blind. They are not smart. They will kill innocent civilians, the way they did it in Iraq in 1991 when they shelled Al-Amiriya civilian shelter and killed 500 kids and women. President Obama speaks about not changing the regime. He said that it will not be Afghanistan, it will not be Iraq. Who guarantees the day after? Who guarantees what will happen the day after? And what does it mean sending a couple hundreds cruise missiles and Tomahawk over the heads of the Syrian people? Would Obama save or revenge the fate of dozens of Syrian kids by killing thousands of them? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, neither politically nor militarily speaking.
Leaders of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee say they have reached an agreement on a draft authorization for the use of military force in Syria, paving the way for a vote by the committee. Among other provisions, the draft sets a 60-day limit on military action in Syria, with the possibility of a single 30-day extension subject to conditions. The deal includes a provision banning any use of U.S. armed force on the ground. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel gave evidence to the committee where they were pressed on the issue of ground troops.
In the event Syria imploded, for instance, or in the event there was a threat of a chemical weapons cache falling into the hands of al-Nusra or someone else, and it was clearly in the interests of our allies and all of us, the British, the French, and others, to prevent those weapons of mass destruction falling into the hands of the worst elements. I don't want to take off the table an option that might or might not be available to a President of the United States to secure our country. If the United States of America doesn't hold them accountable on this with our allies and friends, it's a guarantee Assad will do it again. A guarantee. And I urge you to go to the classified briefing and learn that. Secondly, let me just point out to you that with respect to this question of Americans wanting to go to war, you know, you got three people here who have been to war. You got John McCain, who's been to war. There's not one of us who doesn't understand what going to war means, and we don't want to go to war. We don't believe we are going to war in the classic sense of taking American troops and America to war. The President is asking for the authority to do a limited action that will degrade the capacity of a tyrant who has been using chemical weapons to kill his own people.
Coming up next, Malala Yousafzai formally opens Europe's largest public library in Britain. That and more after the break. Welcome back, and moving on to Egypt. Interim President Adli Mansour says the security situation in the country is gradually improving and that it won't be necessary to extend the emergency law after it expires later this month, despite the return of large Islamist protests following a period of relative calm. Mansour says the emergency law should be lifted by mid-September, and the roadmap for a return to civilian government after the army's removal of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi is on track. His comments were broadcast on Egypt's state TV after thousands of Islamists took to the streets in towns and cities across the country to denounce the new military-backed rulers and demand Morsi's return. Mansour called on all international bodies to respect the will of Egyptians and to refrain from interfering in the country's internal matters. Qatari-owned news channel Al Jazeera has accused Egyptian authorities of jamming the network's satellite signals as the broadcaster kept up its critical coverage of Cairo's crackdown on Islamists. Independent experts hired by Al Jazeera have determined the source of the jamming, saying they were confident about the responsible party. The network says it has been forced to change frequency several times to allow viewers to watch its news and sports channels. Egyptian authorities and local media have accused Al Jazeera of biased reporting on the popularly backed coup, which toppled Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, and of giving wide coverage to demonstrations that followed Morsi's arrest and the crackdown on Muslim Brotherhood protesters. A Cairo court has ordered the closure of Al Jazeera's Mubashir Masr, along with 3 other Islamist channels. Malala Yousafzai, the teenage Pakistani girl shot by the Taliban last year, has formally opened Europe's largest public library in the British Midlands city of Birmingham. The new library, containing around 1 million books, is the new home of what is the second largest display of Shakespeare's works in the world. Students attending a school named after Yousafzai in Karachi say they are filled with pride and inspired by the news. In July, Malala celebrated her 16th birthday with a passionate speech at the UN headquarters in New York City. In Birmingham, she repeated her message that education can change the world, stressing the importance of widening access to education globally. Malala was targeted by the Taliban in October of last year because of her campaign against the group's efforts to deny education to women. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now, here's a reminder of our headlines. Economic committees and the Syndicate Coordination Committee unite during a nationwide strike to end the formation of a strong and capable cabinet. The Council of Maronite Bishops condemns the alleged use of chemical weapons in Syria and calls for a peaceful resolution. And finally, leaders of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee say they have reached an agreement on a draft authorization for the use of military force in Syria. Those were today's headlines from Future Television, live from Beirut. I'll be back again tomorrow for more updates. Until then, have a great evening.
حبك يا لبنان 2020.
وجوب تسهيل مهمة رئيس الحكومة.
إن هذه المعادلة المصر قد ماتت على يد حزب الله بالذات.
We are prepared to strike whenever we choose.